Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Miami Alumni and Friends. Thank you for joining us tonight for a special sparkling wine tasting with Jack Keegan. Jack has been at Miami for 45 years, serving as a botany instructor and greenhouse manager. He is probably best known for teaching Biology 244, Viticulture, and Enology for the last 28 years. The popular course, also known as the Wines Course, focuses on the study of grapes and wines throughout the world, and has had over 5,000 students, with 250 of them this semester. We are also excited that tonight's event kicks off Winter College from the Miami University Alumni Association, a week of bringing some Miami to you online. We hope you'll consider joining us each day at noon this week to hear from Miami experts, and then again on Friday to celebrate Charter Day. The next event is tomorrow at 12 p.m. Eastern, and it's called Crossroads of Conflict, Oxford, Ohio, and the American Civil War. This will be presented by Miami historian Kurt Ellison. You can sign up for this event and all other events at alumlc.org/MiamiOH. We know you're excited to get to Jack's presentation and start tasting some of the wine, but we do have one more special announcement from the Executive Director of the Alumni Association, Kim Tavares. So Kim, I will turn it over to you, and Jack, I'll be back on for questions.
Great. Thanks so much, Emily. Hi, everybody. Thank you for letting me interrupt a minute here. Now, the funny thing is that Jack thought I was coming on here to talk about Winter College, but actually I've come on here tonight to talk a little bit about Jack, because I wanted to make sure that all of you knew that Jack was the 2022 recipient of the Advancement Awards, the Love and Honor Awards is what we call them, for the Dave Roberts Award. And the Dave Roberts Award recognizes a Miami faculty or staff member who consistently goes beyond the expectations of his or her role in service to the division we're in, Division of University Advancement. And this was actually established by a gentleman named Dave Roberts in 1995. We named this award after him, who made many extraordinary contributions to the division and the Alumni Association. And Jack, there is no one more deserving of this award this year than you, my friend. You have done so much for us leading up to the last few years, which we'll talk about in a minute here. But for those of you that don't know, Emily listed all the classes he teaches, but he also goes and visits our alumni in different cities and has hosted many alumni tastings for us. And then when COVID hit, we went to new territory. We had never done these virtual tastings like this, and Jack jumped right in. And I think many of us watching here can say we made it through COVID because of you, Jack. So I just wanted to take a moment to say thank you. And I do have this lovely award here. Oop, I can't get it in the right frame. There we go. That I will be handing over to you. And I just wanted to take a moment so that they all knew and that they can actually watch the award ceremony this Friday at 6 p.m. Eastern time. You sign up for it just like you would for any of our other webinars at the URL here on your screen. So sorry about that, Jack, but I just had to take the chance to say that for everybody watching and to thank you and congratulate you.
Well, thanks, Kim. I'm now redder than I normally am online.
Well, I don't mean to throw you here. I know they're ready to taste and you've got it down. You're a professional. So even with that, I'm going to turn it over to you to get going. And as Emily said, she'll be taking your questions and pop back on later.
Fine. Thank you,
All
Kim.
right.
Take care. Yep. And now I need a drink. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us. Oh, crap. Let's see. Let's get started, shall we? First of all, of course, in fact, this is part of the weekend. And by the way, I am actually signed up for Kurt Ellison's lecture tomorrow. He is a wonderful speaker, and it will really be very good to see. And there's a lot of other things going on that will be great fun to do. So look at some of the talks that are going on. There's another one at the Art Museum tomorrow I'm hoping to get to. So there's a lot of good things going on, both online and here at Miami. So we'll start with that. So let's start first again. As normally, I start with the list of wines. We're doing the Tomasi Prosecco, the Philodora. It's one of their estates there in Italy. Then the Crémant, Langlois Crémant de Loire. It's an interesting name. We'll talk about it a bit later. It's obviously from France in the Loire. The Cobalt, the Bialta Yellow Muscat is a pet nat, and we'll talk about what pet nat is, and we'll taste that. It's actually from Slovenia. In fact, there's a beautiful town there. And then if the only, in fact, pet nat that I could get on wine.com was the 21 field recording rosé. And so we'll be tasting that in a bit also. Then, of course, we're going back to Spain, or to Spain. I should have actually put Spain on there. The Yopart Brut Rosé Cava. And actually, we will talk about cava and some of the other terms that, in fact, are coming out of Spain now. And then, of course, Mum Napa Brut Prestige. This is, in fact, the sort of American part of Mum in Cordon Rouge in France. And then finally, the Colette Champagne, the Art Deco from France, a real champagne. As you also know, if you've had these before, we start by drinking. And so the first wine we're going to have, in fact, is a Prosecco. And Proseccos always make such wonderful aperitifs. They are really very, very easy to drink, and typically not tremendously expensive. And we'll talk some about this. But this, of course, is a Philodora. It's from Tomasi. Tomasi's been I should have checked to see when they got into the into making Prosecco, because I've known Tomasi for a very long time as a producer in the Veneto, typically making both Amarone and making Valpolicella and a number of other wines. But they now have these have really grown. I actually visited there a long time ago. So it's interesting. As we always do in opening a bottle of wine, we take off only the top of the capsule. For those of you who took John Dome's wines course, he always said he didn't like taking off the capsule because it made the wine look naked, and I could not agree more. So I always leave the rest of the capsule on, so you have it looking like that. As you also know, there on the side, there is, of course, the tab, and it's always 6 turns. I have to tell you, I was just in a restaurant last week, and I literally, in fact, I eventually took the bottle off of the waiter, because it's like I was cringing because they didn't have their finger on the top, and you don't know how cold it is. I mean, you really are dealing with a bomb here. So you need to be careful. So when I do it, of course, I always keep my non-dominant thumb on there. I turn it to 6 times, and it's all of them are 6 times, which in fact that waitstaff also did not know. And so it really is helpful to sort of teach them those things. And then, of course, you hold the cork, but turn the bottle. And so by turning the bottle, I don't know if you can see that, it's already raised up fairly nicely. And I really like to have it so it just out there. So in fact, it's really very nice that way. And that is the right way to open a bottle of sparkling wine. There have been too many things. In fact, if you go online and see, Goran Djokovic almost took out an eye, in fact, with a bottle. So it is very important to be careful. A number of glasses, and you'll see a number of glasses this evening for the sparkling wine. I'll fill this a little more full than I do very often for a tasting. If you can see that, I hope you can. You can see, of course, the wonderful bubbles that are coming up of that. Proseccos are just wonderful this way. So let's try this. Just so clean, a little bit of apple, a little bit of sort of minerality that's there. Oh, so just really nice and soft and round. Yeah, certainly apples. Little citrus, just really, really pleasant. But I'm not surprised. Tomasi's a really good producer. And of course, if you taste this wine, it was 55. It was over 55 degrees today in Oxford. Beautiful, sunny. I could see sitting on the deck, having a little bit of this is just absolutely perfect. Actually, in fact, a picture I didn't put in, but they actually have it where, in fact, very light and sort of actually where it was, with the snow behind it on one of their pictures. But just wonderful bubbles, really very easy to drink, nice and fresh, a little bit of that sort of chalky minerality, just nice soft apples. I mean, really, what's really not to like? This is really a lovely Prosecco. Yes. And let me tell you a little bit about this wine. As you can see, in fact, it is from northern Italy, in fact, in the Veneto. There are two, in fact, if you want a tongue twister, there are two towns that are important, and that is Valdobbiadene and Conegliano. And this area is very, very close to those two areas. The very best area is called the Cartesi. In there, sort of very, very nice there. And so you can see, of course, this is the Philodora estate. That is a lovely picture of, in fact, the only one I could really find of the estate up there in there. Just lovely. I took students there in 2011 up to Treviso and up north of there, and it really is just gorgeous countryside, right at the edge of the Dolomites, the Dolomiti, the mountain ranges up there in northern Italy. Let's see here. This, of course, is some of the Prosecco vineyards that you can see there. Again, wonderful sort of on the hillsides. The grape is Glera. We've talked about this before, but it's always good to remember that Prosecco used to be called, the grape was called Prosecco. Well, the problem ends up being is if you use the name for the grape, then anyone can grow it. And so when they found that they were getting Proseccos from Brazil, they thought, we have a problem. And so what they did was they went to one of the older names of the grape, which is Glera. And of course, they kept then the Prosecco as the name then of the region in there. In fact, there is a Prosecco region now in Italy, and then some smaller areas within it. But in fact, most of the wines, in fact, are 100% Glera. A few other grapes that they use, but almost all of them, in fact, use Glera as the proper grape that is there. It's 100% Glera, this wine is. Hillside Vineyards, as it says, at the Philodora estate near Valdobbiadene. Again, nice rich rocks, vinification. It spends 10 days fermentation in stainless steel vats. So they do a first fermentation in stainless steel, but then they actually leave it on the yeast for another 30 days because they, in fact, already want to get some of the yeasty character from that wine even after it's done. But then, of course, it goes into a secondary fermentation to make the bubbles. And so it is in there what's called the Charmat. Actually, I'll be honest, I was surprised because they're Italian that they used the word Charmat because that was a Frenchman who did this. Martinotti was, in fact, the inventor in Italy. And so very often the Italians will use that name. Residual sugar, 11 grams per liter, so 1.1%. So you can tell it has a little sweetness to it, but very nicely balanced with the acid. And so really just a really, really pleasant wine to have, truly. Very nice. These, in fact, I thought I would show you. These are, in fact, the kind of tanks that they would use. Notice the rounded top because, of course, the whole thing is under pressure. And so it's much better to have a rounded top for the pressure, so it holds the pressure much better than a flat top does in there. Some things in the world of wine. This is also another thing that I talk about. Interesting, it's very interesting because France, fewer and fewer French people, especially young people, are drinking wine. And so I just happened to see, in fact, it was 2.5 million hectoliters, which turns out to be 66 million gallons of wine, will be, in fact, distilled into industrial alcohol in France this next year. And I think the Macron government recently had like 160 million euros that they were, in fact, going to give to help the farmers because many of them are in dire straits. Obviously, there are wines that go for hundreds, if not thousands of dollars, but these, in fact, are not one of them. California did fairly well, though this is actually about the lowest harvest in the last 10 or 11 years. 3.35 million tons of grapes, still a lot of grapes, but this is in 2022 in there. Napa Cabernet, though, they don't have to worry. It was still going for $8,900 a ton. And so this was a bit lower than the previous year. And I think it was 2011, in fact, was the highest that they've ever had. But it's been sitting there. It's actually over 4 million back a few years. So it's going to be interesting to see how all of this works. I'll be honest, the wine industry is a bit worried. But of course, I've read pros and cons. There's another article, in fact, I think I might have it in here, that it said people in their 30s are now drinking 8% more wine than they did the previous year. So hopefully they will be, sort of getting a good group of people, in fact, to drink wine. Wildfires in Chile, again, in Biobío, in Araucanía, in a number of areas. It really is sad, like it is anywhere when they have wildfires. And so now, unfortunately, it is Chile's turn in all of that. This is interesting. I thought I would show you. This is the 2020 Chateau Mouton Rothschild or Rothschild label. The artist is an Englishman, Peter Doig, and really very lovely painting that will in fact be on the label. As you may or may not know, Mouton Rothschild changes their label every year. And some of the people who in fact, I mean, world famous artists, and many of them in fact have made millions and millions of dollars on single individual paintings, where here he gets 5 cases of the 2020 Mouton, and then he is allowed to have 5 cases of any other Mouton wine that he wants. So he's paid for 10 cases of wine to put his picture on this label. So that's pretty inexpensive, but lots of good PR on that. Okay. Also, because this is alumni college and we are sort of focusing on alumni, I thought I would do the same. In fact, talk a little bit about the various people who in fact are in the wine business who are Miamians. And it was really great. This picture, in fact, was in the Wine Business Journal just, in fact, last week. Eric Donaldson, who is a Miami alum, in fact, was a biology major. And I've known all these people since they were students. He is now making sparkling wine. In fact, those squares you see there are in fact sparkling wine things to get rid of the yeast that we've talked about previously. And so it is, there's a picture of him because he's just moved into new digs. And so it's really neat to see, and it was great to see this picture of Eric. He's a friend. In fact, he did the wine tasting when I took a group of alums out to California in May. So great fun. So I thought it would be nice to talk a little bit about those people who are in the wine business. Okay. Any questions, Emily, before I get started?
Yeah, we've had a couple come in. So they aren't super specific to this. Well, I guess one is. So can you talk a little bit about the difference between using a stainless steel vat versus a wooden barrel?
Oh, that's a good question. The thing about, again, in these wines, and they might, I can't think of anyone in Prosecco who stores their wine first in wood. It just goes always into stainless. And even in Champagne, almost everyone does everything in stainless. Now, there are a few people, Krug comes to mind right off, that actually uses a barrel for this, or at least to store their wine. And so it does give it a little bit more of a not an oakier flavor, but maybe a little bit more depth to the flavor. Probably makes the wine a little bit more golden also. And so some people do keep their reserve wines in a bit of oak, but it's almost always old. You'll never, at least I never had a wine that was sparkling that in fact was oaky, but that would be the difference. It adds a little bit of more depth of flavor, a little more complexity because of the oak due to the microoxygenation, I think is what happens. Okay.
Yep. And then one more.
Sure.
And this one is one of my own. So kind of a selfish question, but is there a difference between champagne, Prosecco, and sparkling wine? And I ask this because my husband is convinced they're all the same, but is there a difference?
As usual, your husband's wrong. So really, no. As a general term, sparkling wine is the general term. And so all of the wines that we're having tonight are sparkling. Only one of them is champagne, though. Let's see. In a nutshell, the Prosecco is made in what is basically a bulk process. In other words, you put thousands of gallons in a vat. After you've made wine, you put it in there, you put in yeast and sugar, and then that's what makes the bubbles. And then, of course, it's under pressure. And then you filter it under pressure, and you put in a bottle under pressure, and that's it. So that's basically the less expensive way to make sparkling wine. But as you saw from this Tomasi, it can make a very, very good wine. No problem with that at all. Champagne, or the traditional method, actually, I'll take a thing. Actually, another wine we're having tonight is what is called a pet nat, which is French for pétillant naturel, meaning that it is the old way of making sparkling wine, where you actually bottle the wine before the first fermentation is done. And so then, because of that, you have, in fact, you have bubbles from that. But typically it's a lot less bubbles. And those wines will almost always be cloudy because you still have the yeast in it. And so that is the second way that you can make sparkling wines. And this, in fact, was the ancient method. It goes back at least to the 1500s. Finally, it's the traditional method, or the champagne method, is where you make a wine, you blend the wines together to the mixture that you want and use several different grapes. And then you put it in a big tank, in this case, and you mix it with sugar and yeast, but then it immediately goes into the bottle. And so the fermentation takes place in that bottle. And so it will stay, under law, a minimum of 15 months, but in many cases, like tonight's champagne, spends 4 years in that bottle before they then very carefully get rid of the yeast and then add a little bit of sugar and wine back into it, finally putting the cork on it. And so that's how you make champagne. And so those are the 3 different kinds of sparkling wines that are out there. Make sense?
Yes, thank you. And I did want to say, if any of you out there are having a party or a small gathering, I know a lot of people bring their friends together for these tastings. If you want to send your pictures to me at the following email, we will feature them on the screen later tonight. And I'll leave this up for a little bit. So if you want to take a picture of your group and send it to me, I will pull it up on the screen.
Great.
All right, back to you, Jack.
I appreciate it. Sure. Let's continue. The next wine is actually from France. It is from the Loire, and the Loire is, if I'm not mistaken, the second largest producer of sparkling wines in France after Champagne. They make a fair amount in Alsace too. In fact, we've done an Alsatian sparkling in one of the previous sparkling wine tasting, but today we are going to the Loire. And what I'm going to do with this wine is I'm actually going to put it into a white wine glass. And the reason being is you will now find that the cognoscenti, the people who, of course, make these kinds of rules, they feel that really good wine should actually be drunk in a white wine glass because you collect more of the aromas and flavor than you do in the flute, which in fact I had done the Prosecco in. So, and there's some truth to that, but unless the wine is like really good or old or something, you have no problem with a flute. It still has the wonderful aromas coming up. But in fact, you will do that. So I thought I would use, in fact, a white wine glass. This white wine has an interesting name. I've already opened this one. In fact, I will probably open the last one again, but just to make it easy and time-wise, I will do that. This wine, in fact, we'll talk about Langlois. I'm getting some bubbles, in fact, not a whole lot. And sometimes that happens in a wider glass, but I'm getting bubbles out of it. And actually, from a production standpoint, I should get more bubbles out of this wine than I did the first wine, simply because it spent a lot longer on the lees. And in fact, this wine is made in the traditional method. So this is made in the same method that they make champagne. The first thing, of course, you notice, the bubbles help carry the aroma, but even from a distance, it's like you just get this wonderful floral aroma and wonderful fresh fruit. Oh, yeah. And also, a little bit of that iron and minerality that is certainly there in the nose. A little bit of yeastiness, certainly on this wine also. Just really pretty and actually sort of elegant. And of course, you taste this wine. It's really fun because you don't see many bubbles in the glass, but whoa, that goes into your mouth and it just explodes. I mean, it has just an amazing mousse, is what we call it, M-O-U-S-S-E, unlike the four-footed animal. And it really does. I mean, I was shocked at the amount of bubbles that came. But of course, it's hitting all the parts of your mouth, and of course it's warm, and so it's going to come up. Now, almost a little bit of orange there, tangerine in the finish. Nice, bright citrus, really pretty with, again, a little bit of floral, a little bit of that yeastiness. Nice wine. Oh, yeah, oranges, just tangerines. So neat. Good taste. I'm going to take another taste. Yum. has a nice, and again, an elegance, a nice weight to it. It's I don't know if I'd call it a more serious wine than the first one. I mean, they're both very nice, but this one has a little more depth of flavor, a little bit more roundness to it, and very nice. I mean, it's a long finish, really a very, very nice finish. So let's look a little bit about this wine. It is, in fact, here you can see where the Loire River Valley is. The Loire is the longest river in all of France. As you can see, it goes all the way down, in fact, almost down, very close to the Rhone River Valley down there. And of course, you can see many, many different what we call AOCs, or various areas have different names, which of course is so important to the French. They don't say, very often what the grapes are. They basically say what the region is. And so you'll have Sancerre, or too many names in like Cortachon or Saumur, or any number of things like this. In fact, this wine is not very far from Saumur. There is a close-up of the area in the Loire River Valley, and you see, in fact, a number of areas there. And this is actually just a small smattering of all the ones that are there. But you can see that black dot in the middle, which is Saumur. The chateau that's there is quite lovely, but in fact, this wine is made very, very close to this area, and so this is why it just says Cremant de Loire on it, instead of having a specific region to it. Here are some of the vineyards. Again, beautiful rolling countryside. The Loire is known as the Garden of France, the Jardin de France, because it has, in fact, grows many, many other things other than grapes, but a tremendous amount of grapes. And this is chateau country. This is where the kings of France, in fact, early in history, partied, basically. This is where they had many, many beautiful chateaus. Another thing, beautiful vineyards, very nicely, taking care of the canopy, as you can see on this picture. They had this picture. I had to keep it with this. I have no idea why this picture is in there. I know it is, in fact, from their own thing. They have no description as to why they have this picture of this horseman jumping over this, and everyone is toasting them, and that's all well and good. But I thought I just had to add it. still have no idea why. Maybe I will contact them, or try to contact them to find out why they have that picture there, because I have no idea there. But of course, you see Langlois Chateau that is there. It's interesting because you see, in fact, it says Langlois Chateau. Well, it's not because it's a chateau. It's because this company, this came together when two people married, and her name was Chateau. And so that was her last name. And so this is where his name was Langlois. And so it's Langlois Chateau, in fact, named for the two families together, other than being a chateau. So I thought that was sort of interesting to see. This wine is a blend. It's 60% Chenin Blanc, which is probably about the most common white grape grown in the Loire. They include 10% reserve wines, meaning wines that they've held back from previous years. It helps give this wine a little bit more depth, a little roundness of flavor. 20% Chardonnay, which is a little surprising for the Loire. There's not a whole bunch of Chardonnay grown in the Loire at all. And then what is a bit surprising, and probably one of the reasons that this wine has its depth, 20% Cabernet Franc. And Cab Franc is a red wine, and in fact makes a fairly hefty red wine. In fact, I just had a great discussion, in fact, with someone here at the university. Cab Francs have become a very trendy grape. In fact, Cabernet Franc is more expensive than Cabernet Sauvignon in California for the middle, because there's not a lot of it. But it's really interesting, and I love Cab Francs. Fermentation, 62% of the production is devoted to Cremant. So they make a lot of Cremant, but they also make other wines in there. By the way, Cremant is just another word for sparkling in French. You also see the words vin mousseux. It's like everything, things have multiple names. And so you have, in fact, the traditional method. Obviously, Champagne is from the Champagne region. And the people in Champagne, the Champenois, used to use Cremant a lot, that word. But then what they did was they began not using it. In fact, it was the Alsatians who took it up and, in fact, sort of popularized that term again. You don't hear it very often in Champagne any longer, but you used to see it on posters and on bottles. So it's interesting. And, of course, are treated beyond the category standards, only very top Champagne producers. Because, in fact, it's harvested in small bins, pressed, fermented in stainless steel, and then they age it for 24 months versus the 12-month requirement. They're in the Loire, and it's 15 in Champagne, so longer. And then, of course, they add the reserve wines. Alcohols, for a sparkling wine, this is about maximum 12.5% alcohol. I would be surprised if you see any sparkling wines above 12.5%, because the alcohol, the wine, just the way it works, and carrying the flavors, etc., you don't want that heat from the alcohol. So 12.5 is about as high as it gets when you're talking about a sparkling wine. Okay. Decanter gave this 91. As you can see, they say again what it is. They say fresh sherbet apples, enjoyable citrus kick. I get that orange, as I said. Well balanced, good acidity to keep it refreshing in night depth. Pair with a light summer snacks or fish. A crowd pleaser. I could certainly not agree more. And the next person I wanted to mention was, in fact, Dave Scott. Dave was a student. I actually have to find another picture, and so I think he graduated in 2014. He has done a number of various harvest internships and other things throughout the world. He's been in South Africa. He's been in Patagonia. He's been in Spain. In fact, his last one was in Spain. He's currently working, as you can see, for the Hudson Ranch, which is in California. David is the one who is over on the far left-hand side. His is with the people when he was in Patagonia. And so this was sort of the picture. In fact, he sent me several pictures. Of course, these people are friends of mine and have been friends. And sometimes you do see, maybe how your students always think of you. And so this is a picture I found of David that I had to, in fact, show. He will probably kill me the next time he sees me, but that's too bad. Okay. So questions, Emily?
Yes, we do have one, and we're getting a lot of pictures, so I'm excited about that.
That's it.
I'll show our first two. I have more coming in, but these are the two I have uploaded. And this is a new thing, so I don't know what they're going to look like when we pull them on the screen. But this one, here's our first one. We're right behind it. That's from Michelle Bailey. A second one, and they have really cute little napkins from Steve Coleman said thank you for sending that. I know I have a couple more that I'll get in for the next one.
People had that picture too, they were on the other side of the sofa. Yep.
Oh, they should send in a picture so we can see what they see of you. Okay, so this isn't related to this wine, and please forgive me. It's a long question, so I'm going to look at my other screen.
Sure.
But Karen says, congrats on the award. Well-deserved, Jack. Well-deserved. Jack and his wine webinars did prove to be one of the most positive things that happened during the COVID pandemic. Can you please briefly mention Benedict Monk Pierre Perrion's relationship to Dom Perignon Champagne?
Yes. And actually, Dom Perignon was the cellar master at OVA, with the monastery at OVA. And he, in a nutshell, he had a really good publicist after he died, because what happened was the gentleman basically made things up about him. Now, he was, in fact, an excellent winemaker. He really knew about blending different grapes together to make the flavors better. But he did not make sparkling wine. In fact, he thought sparkling wine was a nuisance. He is also, by some people, credited with also using corks first. I don't think that's true either. In all the reading I've done, cork usage probably started it restarted, I should say, in England and then moved to the rest of the world again, and certainly into Champagne. But he was excellent. He was, to my knowledge, he was not blind. He never said quickly, "I'm drinking stars," which of course is a wonderful thing to say, etc. But he was, in fact, a wonderful person when it came to blending. And in fact, that is what happens. So Moët de Chandon, which is the largest champagne producer, they basically took his name in a marketing campaign, I think in the 30s, and they, in fact, named what they call their prestige cuvée. In other words, at that point, for a very long time, their best wine was, in fact, called Dom Perignon, in fact, named for the monk who was, in fact, at OVA. They now make several wines that are actually even sort of more special, but Dom has always certainly been their major prestige wine, and ones that people know. And in fact, it is a wonderful, wonderful cuvée there. So I hope that explains it.
It does. Yes. Thank you. Sorry, my computer is being a little slow. Okay. We had 2 more pictures come in. I only have 1 uploaded, so I'll show the next one. Here is Lori LeBeau and Amy Strasburger and their friends enjoying your tasting. And we did have 1 more, but I will show that on our next
Sure.
our next
It's scary looking at me on a big screen TV. Anyway, so the next wine, as you see, is the Coba, I think it's Baeta Yellow Muscat. This is a pet nat. The first thing I want you to notice, of course, if you have this wine, and some of you may not, you see how cloudy this wine is. I mean, you can really, I'll try to get it closer. I mean, look how cloudy that is. It really just sort of is very, very cloudy, which of course, it has yeast in it. Also notice, it does not have a cork. It has, in fact, a bottle cap, just like you would find on beer or soda in there. And so to open it, of course, you need to just get it open, if I can. This is not the best bottle opener in the world. Whoops, finally goes. And of course, you see the bubbles. And by the way, you can probably tell the bubbles are big. And it's because the smaller the bubbles is often an example of quality. And the reason I say this is because the longer the wine stays on the yeast, the more, before, in other words, taken off, the bubbles get more and more incorporated into the liquid. And so it can come out much more finely and slower. And I've seen, inadvertently someone opens a bottle of wine and it gets, it's not noticed. And I have seen wine the next morning where I've poured it and the bubbles are still there. And so it will incorporate the bubbles very, very, very nicely in there. So again, if I pour a little bit of this will be interesting. I've never had this before. I've luckily been to Slovenia. They make wonderful wines in Slovenia. But to do this, and of course, we'll talk about what a pet nat is in a bit. But you can see, it is. It's like pineapple juice. Decent amount of bubbles, though. Actually, in fact, you see there, and they're actually not too big. Nice bubbles coming out of there. You can sort of see it through the fog in there. And of course, if you smell this wine, ooh, how interesting. Again, appley, but with a nice, a little of the muscat comes out. You're getting a little of that candied aroma. Oh, yeah, that's fun. That's really neat. Oh, yeah, very, very nice. And it really does have a nice fine bead of bubbles there. And of course, I'm going to taste this wine. Fun, a little beery. It has a little bit of that yeastiness, because of course it does. Just like beer. I mean, it's made from yeast, and there's lots of yeast still in there. So it has a little bit of that beery thing. More sort of apple cidery, or a little bit more, like the apples are a little sort of tart, or had a little bit of acid to them there. But nice and clean. No flaws. The yeastiness comes out in the finish, definitely too. Nice wine, very interesting. And and the thing is you don't find a lot of pet nats. If you do go to, there's a couple of places, for example, I know in Cincinnati, I think Pleasantry, which is a very nice restaurant, has some, and there's a couple other places that in fact do a lot of these, what we call, I'll be honest, it's a word I don't care for, and that's natural wines. Like the other ones are unnatural. I'm missing that. I think there are a few things in the world more natural when it comes to wine. By the way, I don't know if you've heard this, but there's a controversy about putting nutritional labels and things like that and additives on the wines. I'm all for it. I mean, why not? I have no problem in transparency. And some people, like the gentleman from Ridge Vineyards, has been putting it on there forever. And most wines have basically nothing in except for, grape juice and the yeast, and the yeast is gone. So it's basically grape juice, alcohol, etc. So turned into wine. So in fact, I don't have a problem with that in there. And I think that most people would not. But it's an interesting wine. I don't get a whole lot of pet nats. And I'll tell you, there are some that are pretty funky. It's like, okay, and so, but again, they're a little trendy. So this is, of course, part of it too. But yeah, this is nice. This is a very well-made example of this. And not too sweet. In fact, it sort of hit me. I looked and you can't find a really good, I have some information obviously about this wine, but you couldn't really find a data sheet with everything that was on there, like residual sugar. There obviously is a little residual sugar in there, but it's pretty dry because if it wasn't, the yeast would just keep working. And of course it did some because that's why there's bubbles in it. And so the yeast made, in fact, this is, I said, this is the ancient, sometimes called the method ancestrale, or as you say, pétillant naturel. Interesting wine. Some things about this wine. Let's see here. There it is. Sort of very funky label, as you can see there. And it's really great. I'm really glad to have a wine from Slovenia. There, in fact, is, if you don't know, that's where Slovenia is. In fact, I had dear friends who lived right across the border from Italy there. In fact, it is very easy now to go back and forth. And of course, they either obviously speak one of the Slavic languages, Slovenian or Italian, very much at the same time in there. Of course, you can see the areas, Croatia, etc., Austria to the north, etc. And they make a lot of very, very nice wines. In fact, here's a close-up of the areas, some of the ones. In fact, you can see if you look carefully, in fact, I'm going to look myself to see where it is. Oh, that's right. Sort of up in the break in the orange, you can see, in fact, the town of, which is hilarious. It's called actually Patui there. And by the way, this is what's the fun thing about doing this. It's a lot of work, but I learn things all the time. I had no idea. It's like, oh, I'd really like to go visit that town. They have an amazing carnival in the wintertime. And in fact, I could see all the costumes and everything else that they do. It's a really very, very neat town to go and visit. Slovenia is really quite lovely. And so I would not mind spending some more time there. So that's where it is. This, in fact, is one of the pictures from there of the vineyards. It was tough to find things, again, where they don't have a lot of things there. This, in fact, is a picture, wonderful town, great picture of this in Slovenia. The winery itself, in fact, is there in the town there. As I said, this is a Pétillant Naturel, and you can see the color there. And of course, you see the yeastiness. You can see that, in fact, that they are hazy and cloudy. And as I said, there are some that are very good. There are other ones it's like, you could have done a better job to it. And so it's an interesting, very small segment of the sparkling wine industry, but one that we're seeing more and more about. So I thought it'd be fun to do. Cobal, as you can see, sparkling pet nat white wine, 100% yellow muscat. The appellations from Lower Styria in Slovenia. They only make 5,000 bottles of this, 12% alcohol, dry, hot summers, snowy winters in that area. And then they also mentioned, I think, hand-picked grapes fermented naturally. The process is closely monitored by the winemaker. Once the sugar level reaches the desired level, the wine is bottled with the wild microflora and continues fermenting in the bottle. So I'm sure that, in fact, they add no yeast to this at all. They only rely on the yeast that are found on the grapes in the vineyard. And so this is, in fact, how pet nats, in fact, are often typically made in there. Oh, did you open it?
Thank you. Actually, what's fun though is look under here.
Oh my heavens! It has a cork.
Yep.
Underneath the bottle cap. Well, now this is interesting. Obviously, I only got one bottle of this, and so I didn't bother opening it or trying it before. Actually, I didn't try the other pet nat also. But so this actually has a cork. I did not think this was one of the things I would be doing this evening. Add it to the list. It's probably not a very big cork, would be my guess. Certainly had a lot of oomph to it. It's crazy. Eventually, I'm just going to put this right here. This is a rosé. It is a very, very light rosé. In fact, it reminds me, in fact, of some of the ones that you very often find in the south of France. It is almost skin-toned in color. So, in fact, if you did get this, clouds as usual, nice bubbles. Ooh, a little weightier than the other, again, because it's not muscat, more apple-y, and again, and yeasty, not surprising. Now this is more hard cidery than beery, I think, because you got that brightness of the apple. What's in this? And I apologize. I should have spent more time. Actually, there was this thing on the side, but didn't actually say much about the grapes were or anything. And of course, the taste this wine, if you did get it. It's nice. It's brighter. It has more acid. It's not as heavy. It's sort of cleaner than the other wine was. I mean, and that's not a plus or minus. The other one just had that sort of more yeasty heaviness, where this is brighter and sort of interesting to taste. Really nice. Yeah, nice little wine. Really not bad at all. Not, none of these wines you would expect, or certainly these wines, to be tremendously complex, and they're not. But nice drinking, great summertime wines, great picnic wines. Why not? There's a little spice in this too, almost a cloviness to it. Very interesting. Very interesting. Okay. Should we continue? See what's here next. Oh, yes. You see that picture? In fact, this is another person in the wine. In fact, actually, Dustin was one of my TAs. He now is the proprietor of Coast Wines in Dublin, Ohio, and has been for a number of years. In fact, I went up and did a tasting for him soon after, sort of for the kickoff of it. In fact, we had a lot of Miami alums there. Great guy, right there, almost right near downtown. And he has an interesting mix of wines right near downtown Dublin. I mean, really very close to the center of town. And nice little shop, really is. It's a really good place to go and visit. So if you're in that area, Dustin would certainly be a person to know. So very good. Okay. Any questions, Emily?
Yep, and we have a lot of pictures too. So I'm going to show a few of those. It's fun, but we are getting quite a few. So this first picture is actually my coworker and his wife, Katie. So JJ and Katie, and they are all three couples are mergers, which is perfect for Valentine's Day tomorrow.
That's right.
All right, our next picture, which I'm jealous of their setup with the pool behind them. They're actually all three Miami roommates. Our next one is the Cordell family, which I just love the cat in the picture. How cute. Another set, or another group of 4 mergers. They have 30 plus years together with 9 children combined that are either Miami alumni or currently at Miami, which is so cool. Fantastic. I love that picture. Yep. And then our final one we've received so far, actually, we just had another one come in, but I'll show it next break, is Vicki Swanson and her friends. So thank you for sending those in. And our question that we have.
Yeah. And of course, and I do know, in fact, because I talk to people typically beforehand, and I know when people are going to be attending or someone will tell me that. It's really fun. But it makes such a difference to know that you're out there and watching, that it just makes it even more special. It makes it a lot more
since fun. You can only see me and yourself, it's nice to know other people are watching other than me.
That's great. That is just great.
So can you talk about, well, first off, why was the wine before the last one we tasted, why was it yellow? What makes it that color?
Well, for one thing, it is in fact a yellow muscat, and so that's the grape variety itself, and so probably itself had a lot of golden color to it because of that. They might have, and didn't say anything about putting it in oak at all or anything, so I imagine it was probably the grape more than anything else. Muscats tend to be more golden. Mm-hmm.
And then when you are looking at wines, when you're picking them and you're finding like a substitute for a different wine, what are you looking at to see if it is a good substitute? Are you looking at the grape, the tasting notes, or what is it that makes you pick that?
What I need is, because in fact these wines I knew were available in Ohio. And so that's sort of the first criteria. And then the next thing, in fact, very often while I'm looking, I also am looking on wine.com, because that's probably the market or the website that has the widest, sort of reach. And so I try to find the wines that hopefully that they are on there. If they're not, then I have to find a substitute. The problem was, and I'll be honest, who knows why, when I looked, and it was only a few days previously, there were in fact 3 or 4 pet nats. And so I tried to find the one by grape variety, color, etc., that I thought would be closer, even though I knew with them being this kind of wine that there's going to be a lot of differences. It wouldn't be different. For example, if you could not find that, or if I did not know that Langlois was not on wine.com, I could have easily found another grape, another variety that in fact was very, very close, had almost all the same grapes, etc. This was much more difficult. In fact, what we did there was in fact the only wine that in fact I could find for that was a pet nat on wine.com. And I knew that was the process in this case was the most important part of it. And so that's why I picked that pet nat.
All right. And then one more question.
Sure.
Can you talk about the value for dollars? So champagnes are often listed as the gold standard for sparkling wines, but where else can you find sparkling wines just as good as fine champagne, but at a much lower price point? Because there's no question. And I mean, all of us look for the maximum quality price ratio. I think we do. And the thing is, and let's face it, champagne is not inexpensive. The least expensive champagne you'll probably find in Ohio now is probably at least $40. And there are some very nice ones. And of course, it gets nicer as the price goes up. There really is a fairly good correlation between price and quality. Not always, but there's a pretty strong correlation. It's not perfect. Otherwise, I look to the Loire. I look to Alsace. We're finding more and more, probably more than any place else, I look to Burgundy, because you can get a Crémant de Bourgogne, in other words, a sparkling Burgundy wine. And for one thing, they use, in fact, Chardonnay and Pinot Noir, so the same grapes of the Pinot Meunier, which they also use in Champagne, but the 2 grapes are the same. The climate is very close to the same, and very often the prices will be less. Another place I will look is an area you may not be familiar with called Limoux. And it's down there along the Pyrenees. It's in France also, but it's along the Pyrenees. It's also a cooler climate. You need to get wine from a cooler climate, because if the grapes get too ripe, then the alcohol gets too high and it just becomes overbearing. As I mentioned before, and this is true with all sparkling wines, but especially champagne. Champagne was basically making lemonade out of lemons. You had grapes that were not ripe, and so you put them through this technological process to get, in fact, that wonderful drink, which is champagne. And the other wines the same way. Grapes that go into sparkling wine are typically not ripe. And you don't want them because the bubbles carry so much of the flavor, they become overpowering and sort of heavy. And so you really want a grape that's lean flavored to make a good sparkling wine. Okay, that's all for now.
Great. We'll continue. I wanted to mention, in fact, I should have mentioned it with the Langlois, but the next 3 wines that we're having, 3, are in fact the traditional method. And this is, in fact, as I said, the champagne method. Just don't tell the French that I said that, because they don't like it. The French will not use that term, the méthode champenoise. They will only use the word typically traditional. And it is. And in this case, as a quick recap, they make wine. Typically, in fact, there's at least 3 grapes. There's actually 6 grapes, but there's 3 main grapes in Champagne. And what they do is they pick the grapes when they at the right degree of ripeness that they want. They then make wine out of the individual grapes. And so they'll make, in fact, a lot of vats out of different vineyards. So it's not unusual for a winery to have 80 different vats of wine that they've made from different vineyards, different grapes, etc. Then the next thing, of course, they do is they blend. And almost always, you saw this with the Langlois, and you certainly see this in Champagne, they use reserve wines. In other words, they've kept some of the crop or some of the wine back from previous years. And so it makes the wine a little bit more the same, also adds a little bit of depth of flavor with the older vintages. And so they blend that in there too. And then once the blend is done, which they call blended de cuvée, they then throw it into a big vat. They add sugar and yeast to it. Then they put it in those separate bottles, and then it is in fact vinified, as I mentioned previously, in that bottle with, in fact, a bottle cap on the outside of it the whole time. It is not until they then get rid of the yeast and then they will finally put the regular champagne cork on top of it. And so that is, in a very quick nutshell, how sparkling wines, in fact, are made. So the next wine we're having is, in fact, a sparkling wine made in that method from Spain. And so this is the low part. I brought a few things too, in fact, either gifts from friends, etc., or glasses I'd like. This is, in fact, one of the Riedels to use for this. This is yo part, which means lop off in Spanish, or actually Catalan. We're up in the Pinedes. We're up against, very close to the Pyrenees in this area. And so Catalonia, this area, of course, they speak a slightly different language than French. Excuse me, well, it's actually close to French too, but Spanish in there. And so this is the Rosé Brut Reserva. Very light in color. In fact, wow. I mean, this is, you know, I look again, it's like, yeah, that says Rosé Brut. And it, in fact, is very and extremely effervescent. Like, wow. As you can see there, look at that. Big bubbles too, surprisingly, lots of little bubbles too. Wow, look at that. Just gorgeous. And so light. I mean, just the lightest, palest pink. Sort of really interesting to see with that. And lots, wow. I still cannot get over how many bubbles are in there, both tons of small ones, but then bigger ones also. And of course, if you smell this wine, wine is so amazing. I mean, it makes it so much fun. I mean, smell that. It's like strawberries and cherries and roses. And maybe a little orange of it. They actually said Valencia oranges. It's like, I don't get much of the orange. I really got sort of that strawberry cherry. And as I said, a really floral nose to this wine. Oh, yeah. So floral. Wow. And beautiful bubbles. Look at that. Just gorgeous. And of course, you taste this wine. Clean, refreshing, good acidity, very good acidity there. So nice. But then, you know, comes in very interesting finish. I'm not exactly sure how to describe that finish because it has a weight to it. It's almost, I won't go so as far as saying meaty, but it really does have a really interesting sort of weight to it in that finish. Oh, and that nose. Gee, just so floral and strawberries. A little bit of spice. Wow. Very neat. Almost a little lime there too. How interesting. Some things about this wine. Here we go. Actually, this wine, in fact, I always feel badly because I was the one, in fact, who sent out as is a cava, and it is a cava, but it's actually a corpinat. And I'll be honest, this was a new word on me. The problem ends up being is, and a lot of it has to do with Prosecco, surprisingly enough. Prosecco has become so popular. And because of its popularity and also its relatively low price, that cavas are made in the traditional method, which is more expensive than doing it in the bulk method. So a lot of the cava producers, at least a lot of people feel this way, though I've had lots of good cavas, they feel that a number of the producers are cutting corners. And so what they decide to do is, in fact, they've actually come up with two new designations for the wines. And this is one of them. In fact, I have a definition coming up. It's actually 10 companies together have come up with much more stringent rules. And so they call themselves corpinat. And so that's why you see on that bottle the term corpinat that was there. In fact, I think, yeah, see there at the bottom, it says corpinat. The old part corpinat there with this. And of course, méthode traditionnelle. with that. So that, in fact, is what's going on there. So Corpinat is where it is, of course, there in Catalan, not very far from Barcelona, up there in the north. As you can see here, Corpinat represents premium Spanish sparkling wine producers. In 2017, the EU approved giving it, meaning, of course, the word means heart of the Penedès, probably in Catalan, the use of a visual trademark for its 11 members. Front labels guarantee the entire production process from certified organic viticulture to estate vinification, aging, and bottling. So a very small group of the huge amount of cava. Here, in fact, is the winery, surrounded by its beautiful vineyards. So very, very nice to see. Here's another picture, in fact, looking at the mountains also. I'm not sure if that's the Pyrenees there or not. Could be, no, I think it's Sierra Cantabria. Here, in fact, is a picture of their cellars with, in fact, the pupitres that they used to hand riddle. I'm sure everyone uses machines now, like you saw in that picture of Eric that was there. This wine is 60% Montestral, 20% Garnacha, and you can see again they use the Catalan spelling of Garnacha, not the Spanish spelling there. And 20%, this was a shocker, Pinot Noir. You simply don't see Pinot Noir up in this region much at all. By the way, Montestral is the Spanish name for Mourvèdre, which is a red grape, fairly heavy, that is very typical in the southern France. And this is what you see. Extremely gentle press. They make a point that they use a lot more. They don't press as much as many other people do. They call it semi-unpressed or sold off to. They don't do it, so they only really take a very first sort of pressing that is there. It's aged in the bottle on the leaves following the secondary fermentation of a minimum of 20 months. So in fact, actually longer than you could and call it champagne. So of course it's been there. They hand riddle, and disgorge. So none of this, they do not use machines. They hand riddle and disgorge. Their Grand Reserve is a limiting bottle. No, the Brut, what you have here, the Brut Rosé is mechanically riddled and disgorged. It's their top of the line ones that are not. And alcohol, 11.5% there. Interesting wine. Lots of bubbles, still has lots of the small bubbles. I'm still surprised at the big ones that in fact are still there. Beautiful color. Yeah, cherries and strawberries. Wines, they just gave this 91. Light apricot colored wines, Valencia oranges, roasted almonds, and button mushrooms. Spreads across the palate with flavors of lemon preserves. I can see that. Marzipan, which of course is almonds, and rose petals, certainly the roses. There's a lemon zest note on its bright finish. So 91 from the wine enthusiast. And lucky enough to in fact sort of get reacquainted with Jessica. She, as you can see, the VP of Consumer Sales and Marketing at Frog's Leap. She led our tour when we were out there in May, so she was absolutely wonderful. I can't remember. I think she was pre-med and she took the wines course. I'm sure these people either curse me or blame me or credit me with getting them into the wine business, because she then went to California looking for a job in the wine industry. She worked at Darius for a number of years, and as you can see, is now VP of Consumer Sales and Marketing at Frog's Leap. And she happens to be married to Kevin, who is the Director of Sales at Barnett Vineyards up in Spring Mountain. And so I visited with both of them, in fact, when I was there in May. So it's really very neat. And Barnett, both places are wonderful places to visit. Just really great and very, very different. So a lot of fun. And so it's nice making those kinds of people's acquaintances. Questions, Emily?
Yes, we do. And before I get to those questions, let me show our last batch of pictures that we received. Here's one from Elizabeth Cunningham, Carl and Mary Stein.
With their Miami sweatshirts on?
Yep. And Sally Sappenfield and her friends.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
Excellent.
It's a lot of fun to see people out there and
that's right.
See what your different parties look like. This doesn't have to do with the wine, but a couple people have asked what's on the mantle behind you.
Okay, let's see what is on the mantle. A number of things, and of course, the statues are actually reproductions from St. John the Divine in New York. And it's sort of funny because I bought them, I cannot tell you how long ago, and then they were sort of stored away. And there was a number of years ago, it's like, oh, I should put those out. And so I did. It's not as easy to see, but one of the things, in fact, spring is coming. And so there are tulips back there also. That in fact, it's amazing. I bought those tulips yesterday and they were greener than green. They had barely started to show color. And in one warm day like today, now they're in full yellow color. So that's really nice. And then, of course, I shouldn't say this, but I buy lots of candles. In fact, I buy tea lights in quantities of 1,000 because I use lots of tea lights. And so that's what's back there, all tea lights. And this, of course, is I have a fireplace insert downstairs. And so this is the fireplace here in the living room. And that's where I am at my house, in the living room. And of course, if you look to the one side, there are candles, and to the other side, in fact, is one of my amaryllis that's blooming, that side. So yeah.
Don't feel bad about your candle buying habits. We also buy a lot of candles and have kind of a candle addiction. So you talked about the size of the bubbles in a couple of the different wines. Does the size of the bubble matter or change or affect the taste of the wine at all?
Yes, I think so. For one thing, it's the delivery. In other words, when you drink it, it really is nice to have a wine that has a really nice sort of creamy mousse, and you'll get that from fine bubbles rather than big bubbles. It's the difference between drinking a Pepsi and drinking a good bottle of wine. In other words, in a good bottle of sparkling wine, because it just has a completely different mouthfeel. It's not as acidic and it's not as big. So it really is nice. As I said, I was truly shocked by that Langlois, which did not have a lot of bubbles, but yet had a tremendous mousse to it. So that was really very nice. And so I think, because if you think about it, it makes sense too. When you have those, probably in many cases, hundreds of thousands of bubbles bursting at the same time, it really carries that aroma to your nose. And so really carries the flavors and aromas very nicely there also. So yes, having the small bubbles is nice, and it's always a question of mouthfeel also, and so I think both of those go into having a very, as they say in the wine business, a fine bead.
All right, we have more, but I will save them for the next round of questions.
That's fine. We will continue. Our next one, in fact, we are actually in California, and that's to Mum Napa. This is the California sort of offshoot of Cordon in Champagne. By the way, of course, you'll never see the word champagne on it. Now, this is a good example. Look at those bubbles, and look how they've already held together. Very, very nice. I'm sorry, I didn't realize I was not on there. I'll pour a few more. How terrible. Actually, it's not as much, but they really did have quite a bead. And of course, you can see absolutely, sort of surprisingly, lots of the larger bubbles, but you can still see the bubbles coming up, the smaller ones up from, in fact, the center. And so clearly quite lovely there, as is this glass that was given to me by a friend. So I wanted to show it off. So yes. So nice bead. You can't always tell by how many bubbles are sort of coming up, simply because it can be bubbles, by the way, if you notice in your glass, they all come from the same place, typically, always. The reason is because the bubbles need a place to coalesce, to come together. And so you need to have some imperfection in the glass. If you make glass that's extremely, extremely smooth, really fine, you won't have any bubbles because there's no place for the bubbles to start from. And in fact, very often they will put a little bit of a scratch in the bottom of the center of the glass, because then you have a rough area, and that's where the bubbles will start. And this is why you see the bubbles coming up from the glass in a stream, always from the same place. And this is because they need a place, in fact, to coalesce. So that's what's going on with this. Very light in color, very, very pale straw. And of course, if you smell this wine, the first thing I notice, of course, it is, really lovely, but it's fruitier than all the other wines we've had, even with the strawberries and cherries in the Yopart. This is there's always a depth of aroma and thing, because even though these grapes come from the coolest part of Napa Valley, it's simply warmer. And so they develop more of these fruit aromas that you are certainly getting out of this glass. But very nice, very, very soft. Bugs me sometimes when you it's like, oh, I smell certain things. It's like, but I can't always put a name to it. I'm sure we're all affected with that. But it is very soft, very round, a little jammy, little orange marmalade. And of course, you taste this wine. Very nice. Good acidity. It has a little bit of a depth to it also. And so very, very nice along those lines. Just soft, round. I mean, even though there's a fair amount of acid to it, and it's very nicely balanced, because in fact, there's a decent amount of sugar there. There's probably residual, I would think about 1%. But just nice. A little warm. I would not be surprised if this is probably 12.5% alcohol. This is the first one where I felt, oh, it's a little warm. You can feel it in your throat, and just a little bit. Not bad, but it certainly is there. Very pretty. This is, in fact, Mum's entry-level wine. But I think it shows up very, very well, and they make a ton of it. So let's talk about this wine. As you see, Mum Napa there. And of course, it's in good old Napa Valley, which is just there north of San Francisco. There's a close-up of the various appellations, in other words, the various portions of them. But we are really talking about in Carneros and just down there in the south, because those are the coolest regions, because they're closest to the water and to the marine air that comes in. So the further south you go in Napa, the cooler it is, because you are closer to the San Pablo, San Francisco Bay. So that's what you're seeing down there. And so that's probably where, in fact, most of these grapes come from. They actually use at least 50 different people that they get the wine from. I had to add this picture. Of course, you're welcome to Napa Valley. I took this picture, in fact, when I was there. So I had to take a picture of the sign with myself in it at some point in time. So I thought I would add that there. This, of course, is Mum's part of their complex there. This is, in fact, the interior. So yeah, look at that. Summer, winter. By the way, I often I told my students this too, with spring break coming up. This is not a bad time to go to California. For one thing, they're not so busy. The grapes, of course, are dormant. But especially with all the rain California's had, the mustard is blooming like crazy. All the rest of California is just green. And so it is, in fact, a nice time. The temperatures aren't bad. And so it really is certainly a nice time to visit California. But this is a picture of the interior there. This, in fact, is a picture of the vineyards that are there, as you see in Mum Napa there. Beautiful picture, of course, of the things, I think, looking at the Yountville Hills there. This wine is a blend. It's 45% Chardonnay. It's 45% Pinot Noir. But then, interestingly enough, it is 10% Pinot Gris, which of course is basically the pink variety of Pinot Noir, and Pinot Meunier. In fact, they, to an extent, but more Chandon, which of course is the American arm of Moët de Chandon, Domaine Chandon, they both planted Pinot Meunier, which is it's a different kind of Pinot Noir. And widely used, of course, in Champagne, but not seen so often in California. As I was right, residual sugar, 1.1%, so 11 grams per liter. It's a brut style, though. You can go up to 12 and still be considered brut there. Alcohol, as I said, not surprising, 12.5. pH fairly low. Of course, you expect 3.15. It's been 18 months on the lees. That's what they mean when they say time en tirage. Not sure why they had to use French there, but they did. And so it's on the lees, in fact, for 18 months. And I like that. Aging potential, drink now. It's like, okay, I can do that. And in fact, it really is. It's really a lovely wine. And as I said, in fact, actually, let me show you this. And I read it again, 90 points from the Spectator. As it said about sparkling wines, and this is their workhorse, non-vintage bottling. And this, in fact, came up as number 7 just in a recent Wine Spectator. They gave what they considered to be the 10 best values of wine actually in the world. And so this, you can see, it's part of a thing. First vintage is in 83, 50 different growers. Coolest part, oak, knolls, and carneros. Equal parts, as I said, with a blend. Small amounts of aged in French oak, and they make 220,000 cases of this. So if you multiply by 12, that's over a million. It's over 2 million cases. So, or 2 million bottles. So they make lots of this wine. It's a nice wine. It really is. Very, very good wine. So I thought it'd be fun to do for all of those reasons. And speaking of California, I thought, but I didn't have time to change the picture. He sent me another one. Drew Ballon, also, of course, a Miami alum, took the class. From there, he is now the Midwest rep of Farniente. He got into wine, not surprisingly, because of his dad, who graduated from Miami in 74, and so was, in fact, a wine collector. And so after a number of other jobs, he began working for Heidelberg, which is, in fact, a very good and one of the largest distributors here in the state. He worked his way up to doing the fine wines, and then finally was the fine wine manager at Ohio Valley, which is, in fact, a part of Heidelberg there. And then he jumped much more into sort of the wholesale part of it. And so he is now the Midwest rep for the wonderful wines of Farniente. Here, I think he's in Ohio, Michigan, and Indiana. And so that is, in fact, what he's doing now. Ohio, Indiana, and Kentucky, excuse me. I happen to look that down there. So, in fact, he says, of course, his career in wine was like a dream come true. So it really ends up being fun in all of that. So, again, that's Drew. Questions, Emily?
Go. Yes. So someone noticed that one of the wines that we tasted tonight was in a clear bottle. So is light the enemy of wine like it is beer?
Yes. In fact, for the most part, you really don't want it to be in a very clear bottle. Which one? Oh, actually, we'll see. And it's interesting. And it's a good point, and I'm glad you brought it up. This was the Pet Nat, and you don't want to age this. This should be drunk as soon as possible. And so it's sort of the same way, with what? Miller High Life is also in a clear bottle. Well, I know something about beer. I'll be damned. And anyway, this wine is for you would not store this. This should be drunk probably within 6 to 9 months, maybe a year of bottling. And so that's a very good point. So you see everything else, in fact, was in color, but this, of course, because of what it is, was not.
So because my White Claws come in cans and not clear bottles, can I age those?
Exactly.
Can I age?
You know they don't last long enough. Come on.
So talking about aging and saving wine for later, what's the best way to save the sparkling wine that we're tasting tonight? If it's already opened.
Yes.
And actually, too, if you wanted to age a sparkling wine, do you lay it down? Do you keep it sitting up? So both questions.
Two good questions. For one thing, if it's interesting, you always hear people about laying down wine, and you don't have to. The amount of air space between the cork and the wine will be at 100% relative humidity all the time. And so it really doesn't make a difference if it's up against the wine or not against the wine. You want to get some of the preservative things that I have? Thank you. It's funny you should mention it because, of course, I have a number of them. In fact, I almost ordered 2 more today. And there are, in fact, a number of different things that you can get to hold wine. And we've talked about this before, and I highly recommend it. In fact, actually, I will be honest, I was looking this morning, and in fact, I still can't figure out why, on can you find the one that has the turn to it? Might actually be on a bottle, so you just bring the bottle. It's in the fridge. in there. But what you want to do is have something that will sort of hold on. Get a bottle here. So what happens is you want something that will hold the bubbles. So like, for example, this one, you put that down in there. And then, of course, because it has a good lip, you make sure that it's very nicely secured. And so that will hold all the bubbles in. The wonderful thing about sparkling wines is, and I always feel, and I always think, and maybe we should, if we do sparkling wines, I should have had a link to these, because they'll keep very nicely. They'll keep for days, because everything that's coming up out of this wine is carbon dioxide. And air is the enemy of wine. Well, and carbon dioxide is heavier than air. And so because of this, when you close this up, this wine will probably last. It probably will still be perfectly fine for at least a week, if not longer. And so that works out very, very well. So that's one of them. This is the one. This is the right one. It's the one that has a single flange that comes down. As you can see, I've lots. This one, of course, is pretty much the same way, the double flange. This one actually has something that expands inside. And so when you turn it, it gets wider. And so it holds the bubble in also. This is another one that does the same thing. And the one that I really have found, though, and we're going to wait, I think it's there, or it's in the thing, because I know I have them. I almost bought a couple more, because it is my absolute favorite one when it comes to storing wine. And that is, it has a top, but then it has almost a lever, and you put it around the neck. And so it holds it in to the neck. And obviously my friend is having problems finding it. I swear I have one. I know I've got at least two in there. And I was actually going to buy some more, because it really is the way to do so. But you can see, in fact, this Mum Napa is the same way. It has that lock on it. So anyway, well, it'll come up when we finish the other one. That's no problem with that. Okay. Other questions?
We do have a few more, but I will save them for the end, because they're more general questions.
That's fine. Okie dokie. The last wine, in fact, we're doing a Champagne Colette. It is, as you can see, from Aix, which is in fact a small town. The two main towns in Champagne are Reims, and there are many, many houses in Épernay. Aix is the third one that's there, and this is in fact is where Colette is. And you can see, of course, this is the Brut Art Deco that is there. So let's see. I said, this, of course, is the bottle. By the way, you can see, of course, that lovely, let's see if I can get that so you can see okay. It's almost clear, so you see the Domaine Colette and the Art Deco that is there. By the way, this is Champagne Colette. There is actually, I found out, amazing as I said, the things you learn, there's also a Domaine Colette. In fact, it's three gentlemen who run it, and I had no idea. So these are two different places now. You see there, the same way, I thought I would show you. Again, non-dominant hand, because I'm left-handed, my right thumb is on the top always. Pull down that tab, turn 6 times, and now it's open, and then hold the bottle, turn the bottle, hold the cork. You can see that's already rising up. In fact, it wants to leave. Very, very much so. And so, but, it's all a question of control. Simple as that. Oh, in fact, here, let me put that up. Look at that. And by the way, that is a good thing too. My dear friend Mary Horn, who works, in fact, for Heidelberg, she says you do not put it along the side like you do beer. You pour it in the middle. So there it is. There's a beautiful glass there. Again, another gift, but you see all of those bubbles coming out of that wine. It's a beautiful glass, as in fact was the previous ones also. There. Very light in color. Very, very light in color. Sort of interesting. Lots of bubbles. I mean, look at that. I always say it looks like an upside down snowstorm. You see all that stuff. It looks like a snowstorm with everything, of course, going up instead of coming down in there. By the way, here in Oxford, we've had measurable snow basically, well, one time, but still you didn't have to plow. And we've only had plowable snow one time this year, and it's going to be practically 70 on Wednesday. So it's a little crazy. So you smell this wine? Oh. Again, you have the fruit, but here you have a little almonds, a little hazelnut. And, because of the yeast and the time that spends, and probably the reserve wines in this wine also. Oh, there's just, you talk about elegant, and look at the bubbles. I mean, look at the top. It's amazing, in fact, that I still have, in fact, sort of a foam on the top because it is bubbling so energetically. Oh, that's pretty. The yeastiness, the brioche, as we sometimes say, from that breadiness, that sort of crusty bread aroma. And almonds, hazelnuts. It's a nice fruit. And of course, if you taste this wine, and see what I mean about yeast and mousse? It just has that wonderful creaminess. So soft. But nice acidity and that depth of flavor. You're still getting those, that almond, hazelnut, that nuttiness that is there. And clean. Nice acidity. Just so elegant. Oh, yeah. Yeah, just beautiful. Yum. Very nice. Very nice. And the contrast, especially between it and the Mum Napa. The Mum Napa is perfectly good, perfectly fine. But there, it's West Coast, it's California, it's the fruit. Here, it's the elegance, it's the sort of nuttiness, it's the other sort of concentration of flavors, the complexity that is there. I mean, both of them are wonderful wines, but this is truly, truly lovely. A little bit about this wine. As you can see, Domaine Colette, there it is, Brut Art Deco. This company was founded in 1921. In fact, they just celebrated their centenary. And so this was, in fact, very much at the Art Deco time. And so they've done, in fact, they really have an interesting places, as you will see. This, in fact, is one of the places they have sort of outside of I. This is their very modern winery and place where you can go there. In fact, as you can see, right at the edge of town with the vineyards right above. In fact, I love this picture then. This is looking out of that building, up the hill at those vineyards there. So very, very neat. Sort of interesting too. And I guess I've seen this some in Champagne or in Burgundy. And of course, that hill's not very steep, but you can see they have vertical vine rows. Instead of being horizontal across the thing, they actually, come down to the come down the hill. But of course, it's very minor, and so they probably, don't have to worry about erosion, etc. But that's interesting to notice that, because that isn't normally the way you would see grapevines. This, in fact, a great picture they had of the grapes in flower, and so there they are flowering. Very interesting. When I took the group out to Napa, the vineyards that we visited the first day were, in fact, in bloom. And to me, they smell wonderful. And here, for some other people, they could not perceive that aroma at all. And that's not unusual. I mean, there are, in fact, differences. People are different. But I love the smell of grapes when they're blooming. It really is a wonderful aroma there. And then, of course, they also have beautiful pictures. I think this is looking the size of the grapes. It's probably Pinot Meunier, but on a very old vine there. And these are all, in fact, from Colette's website. And actually, I have a lot of things on Facebook also. Lots of videos, which, in fact, we can't use. And, of course, these, in fact, are the cellars. This is a great picture, in fact, that was on in fact, their Facebook page also, looking back when some people would visit. So wonderful. These wonderful old caves there are just great to see in all of this. They also have a museum, and in fact, you're teaching people about this is actually a lot of the older implements that were used, in fact, in Champagne. And there are some wonderful museums like that, in France. Just great, in fact, to see in all of this. As you can see, exceptional assemblage of 7 Grand Crus and 13 Premier Crus, carefully selected. In fact, this wine, even though it doesn't say on the label, these are all from Premier Cru vineyards, and so it could be called Premier Cru. Let me explain that very quickly. In fact, Champagne's weird. Let's put it bluntly, because there were in 1911 there were tremendous riots. In fact, the National Guard had to be called because, again, there was so much fraud. People were using grapes from other parts of Champagne or other parts of the country that, in fact, were not from Champagne, and so should not have been called Champagne. And so, obviously, the people were not making any money. The poor farmers were really upset about it. And so, in fact, they did. They basically attacked the main large houses, etc. And so it was really sort of a mess. And so this is why you ended up starting in Champagne the laws against fraud. And fraud is still a major problem in the wine world. In fact, there was a thing, was last week, I think it was in China, 50,000 bottles worth $40 million were in fact found that were in fact, none of them were in fact what was in the bottle. So fraud remains that way. But it says the Premier Cru of Viognier and Marie, in other words, they get 40% Pinot Noir and 40% Chardonnay, as it says at the top, and then another 20% Meunier, as it said, from this complete the assemblage, the roundness and suppleness. In other words, it's there. And so, in fact, these are all from, as I started to mention, I apologize, in Bordeaux or other places, they do the rankings by individual vineyards. In Champagne, they do it by towns. And so it's all the vineyards around the town. And obviously, some can be better than others. And so this is why, knowing your house and knowing what you like, because there are a number of Champagne styles that are there. And so this really, in fact, makes a huge difference in all of this. 4 years on the lees in their cellar. In other words, it stays in that bottle with the yeast for 4 years. The dosage is very low, 8 grams per liter, not super low, but still a lot drier than the other wines, I think, than all the wines we've had, in fact, tonight. So a little bit drier, but still 8 grams per liter of sugar that are there. Critical acclaim, this wine got 91 from the Spectator. Clean, linear, chalky, black raspberry, poached apple, biscuit, candied lemon zest. The enthusiast said, wine's its name, 3 main grapes, poise, dry wine, crisp apples, and touch of toast. After 4 years aging, gives it balance and sense of maturity. And decanter gave it 90. Strawberry and light grass aromatics, followed by a chalky, zesty, and creamy palate. Fresh, pretty well-made champagne with a long citrus finish in there. And another person, of course, in the wine industry, this is Evan Rose. He is, in fact, the assistant winemaker at Stoller. He's from, in fact, the east side of Cincinnati, Bethel area. He worked over there for a winery since, in fact, he was 14, and then worked in a number of other places here in Ohio, and then a couple different places in Oregon. And as I said, he is now the assistant winemaker at Stoller Vineyards in Oregon. And there he is, in fact, picking the grapes there. And like all of these people, wonderful individuals. And I feel badly. In fact, right away, I have a Jess Hogg, who, in fact, I had planned on putting here, but again, sort of busy. He, in fact, is in charge of all of the sort of, making sure that everything is done properly at Scheid Vineyards in California. And there are a number of other people in the wine business, but these are the people, in fact, who I got some things with that I wanted to, in fact, share with tonight. So questions, Emily?
Yeah, we do have some that have come in. So people have noticed that you have different, you've had a lot of different glasses. So I know you mentioned the difference between the champagne flute and the white wine glass, but what about the other glasses that you've had? Do they mean anything, or is it just the way they look, or what's the difference?
Yeah, and you're right. I think for the most part, it's the way they look and the quality. I mean, though it is funny, and sometimes this glass, for example, this is a Riedel, and this Riedel glass, and sometimes I tend to not be very doctrinaire when it comes to glasses, even though I seem to have several different kinds. But these, in fact, were gifts, and very often, in fact, when I use them, I remember the people who gave them to me, and so that ends up being part of the reason that I use them. It's like so many things. In fact, again, a good friend, I did a wine tasting for his wife's birthday, and so he gave me this cleaver. I think I think of him every time I use that cleaver, and so it's fun to have those kinds of things. But I think for the most part, a good flute is a good flute, and a decent wine glass. And I basically have white wine glasses, because they're typically smaller, cooler. Red wine glasses, because they're larger, they hold the aromas a little better. It's a little easier for swirling. I do have specifically, maybe because I got a deal, Pinot Noir glasses, which in fact I really do think make a little bit of a difference when you're tasting, Pinot Noirs, from either Burgundy or thing. And then otherwise, it seems to be a lot, and sort of is, but it's like, oh yeah, I mean, wine, I think you can enjoy, but it is nice, having a glass like this, smelling the wine out of this. It's a nice experience. It's a nice visual experience, and just sort of with everything and sort of feeling the glass. Also having a nice thin rim, and you can find glasses, that are not very expensive. I mean, even just the restaurant Riedels, they're not very expensive, and I think they do the job. I don't have to buy 20 different glasses. Oh, I need that for my Riojas. I need that for the no. I think even if I had the money, I would not do it. So that's I have lots of temptations in the world, but luckily wine glasses aren't one of them. And I have enough. In fact, someone laughed recently because they asked me how many wine glasses I had. Oh, because I did one of my charity tastings not very long ago. And I probably have in the house maybe 200 glasses. But I do love entertaining. They get used. You'd be surprised.
That is a lot of glasses. Where do you store them all? Well, actually, we saw your wine cellar. You have quite a bit of room for your wine. Okay, so can you describe the differences between brut, dry, demi-sec, and sec?
Oh, sure. What happens is, and it probably, I think for the most part, you have to blame the English. Champagne originally was sweet. And in fact, very often. And of course, the first thing they had to do, you have to realize champagne is really a technology, because when they first made champagne, they didn't know how to get the yeast out. And so even though it was a second fermentation, unlike the pet nats, they still had trouble. And then they figured out how to get the yeast out, and also how much sugar to add in the second fermentation so that the bottles wouldn't explode. So that was the first thing. But it ended up, for most of the Edwardian era is probably, in fact, I think a lot of people think of, and again, Art Nouveau, or the late 1800s, the beginning of the 20th century, before the First World War. I mean, this was in fact named for King Edward in England, and champagne was the drink of choice. And it was always, it seemed to be, that was like, so the wine was fairly sweet. And then they wanted something that was dry, and so they called it sec or dry. And then they wanted something that was drier, and so then they called it extra dry. Well, it really didn't sound good to call it extra, extra dry. And so the word that they came up with was brut. And even brut can, as we talked about, can have as much as 1.2% sugar, because there's so much acid in champagne that it needs a little bit of that. But now, because of climate change, you have, though grapes are slightly riper, we have people, in fact, who are not doing everything to get rid of the acid that is in there, because typically you had too much. And also, many of the wines don't need any dosage. In other words, they add no sugar to it. And so it can be, they call it, brut sauvage, brut natural. There are several number of different names, but you can in fact find extra brut. There are in fact a number of names that are done for wines that have absolutely no sugar added in the final thing before they put the cork on. And so that's what it is. And there's some overlap. Don't absolutely, on these, but I think, let's see, brut can go up to 1.5% sugar. Extra dry can be between 1.2 and I think 2.5, and then there's overlaps between each one as you get sweeter and sweeter in there. But almost all the wine that you will find, and that's certainly true of Champagne, also true of Prosecco, also true of almost all these wines, they will either be brut or extra dry. You do not find a lot of sweet sparkling wines. There are some, but they're simply a small, very, very small percentage.
Thank you. And then our last question of the evening is, how do you get the wine tasting notes or wine making and tasting notes for each of the wines?
Obviously, I spend a lot of time online. Many of these places, of course, luckily have websites of varying degrees of quality. And my problem ends up being is, and it's always interesting, that I just finished telling my wines class this, for the most part, I hate videos. The problem with videos is, again, maybe I shouldn't be talking. People like to talk. And so they talk, and it's like, finally, it's like, can you get to the information that I want? And so that ends up being a problem where I want to skim an article and I want to find it. And of course, so it is, I look at their website, and then very often I'll put the name in. And then, for example, I will then look for images. And so then because again, you'll get things out of TripAdvisor, for example, or off of Facebook, or a number of things. And so I look for the places so I'm trying to give you as good a picture of where the wine comes from as possible. And sometimes it's easy and sometimes it takes some time.
All right. That was our last question for tonight.
Great. I've got a few things to show you. For one thing, this is, in fact, I take pictures, of course, of campus. And I thought this was really great. In fact, I thought this picture turned out pretty well of Wayne Embry. This, of course, was a recent statue that was put up in front of Millet. And, of course, he was extremely important as a basketball player, but then extremely important for so many other things in his wonderful career, both and certainly a great supporter of Miami University. And so I thought I would show you that. If you've not been back to see that, it's in front of Millet. I thought too, again, the wind was up and the flag was flying so beautifully, and that's looking up from Millet up Talawanda. And so you may remember walking up Talawanda for any number of things, either going to Millet or playing, and of course, all the fraternities, in fact, that are there. I thought I would also show you the new information building that is going up, a very large building that has, in fact, some just an amazing things when it comes to green screens and that kind of stuff that's going to be in it. And so that's going to be a real, I think, really good for a number of different colleges here at the university. And so that's nice. By the way, it is, in fact, where Swing used to be. I've sort of forgiven the university for tearing down taking down the one oak to the side, but not completely. This, of course, is Raudebusch. And again, the flags there in front flying. So I thought I would show you, in fact, that. And I was in front of Dorsey because, in fact, I was trying to get some pictures from Cookfield, but there were very few people down there, so I didn't get a good picture there. But I was at Dorsey, so I thought many of you may have been in Dorsey, so you might want to see that it, in fact, is still there with it. And then finally, just to show you that spring is coming. This, in fact, was a picture I took right outside of my house of a hellebore in full bloom. So again, thank you from me and from the Miami University Alumni Association. And thank you so much for being there and being out there. I truly appreciate it.
Thank you, Jack. And you'll have to, if we do a summer tasting, you'll have to take a picture of your back porch and show all of your plants in full bloom, because it's so pretty. It's really something else.
I should say again, we are having the next performing arts wine tasting will be on Alumni Weekend, like it was this past year. And so a good reason to come back to Miami University. And you can always visit my back porch also. So not a problem at all.
It is a good weekend. And thank you, Jack, for the plug on Alumni Weekend, June 9th and 10th.
Correct.
But we do have a couple other events coming up I wanted to mention. So thank you again for everyone that joined us tonight. And thank you, Jack, for helping us kick off Winter College.
And make sure, and the thing is, and really everyone, I mean, for example, On the 28th, I might tell you, because in fact, I've already signed up. There's a gentleman who's talking about 10 tomatoes who changed the world. And there's so many things that the university really has online that are really fun and very educational, and no problem to drop in on. And so that's another one, in fact, that I know I'm going to be enjoying.
Yeah, thank you. And you can find all those on alumlc.org/MiamiOH. But congrats again, Jack, on your Dave Roberts Award. It's very well-deserved. Just a reminder, like Jack said, we have different presentations and lectures all week. We will have a faculty speaker every day at noon. And in fact, we have 3 events this Friday to celebrate Charter Day, a cooking demo, the award ceremony, and a bourbon tasting, all at 12, 6, and 7 respectively. All in Eastern time zone. I would also be remiss not to mention our 11 Honor Weekend coming up in Atlanta. This is a big in-person event happening March 9th and 10th. For more information, you can visit miamialum.org. It is listed on that site. So thank you again for everyone for your time tonight. I hope you'll join us for other webinars this week. Thank you again, Jack, and to all of you, have a great rest of your evening. And as always, love and honor.